Hello, this is Professor Nassar. Welcome back. We are going to be discussing in this mini lecture the second of four lectures going through the gross anatomy of the kidney. In this lecture, we will cover the large kidney model in this demonstration. So let's just go through the parts. If you haven't already, I would suggest you go through part one, where we go through the small kidney model, where I outline the major components of the kidney. In this demonstration, I'm just going to mostly name parts. There will be a little bit less of a description until we get to this section here. Okay, so again, the major components are the capsule, the cortex, medulla. Within the medulla, you can see certain aspects of the cortex come down and divide the kidney into lobules, and these portions of the cortex that come down into the medullary region are called renal columns. You can also see that within the renal columns, you can find some blood vessels. The renal columns divide the kidney up into lobes, and we can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lobes in this kidney model. Within the medulla, we have these triangular regions that are called renal pyramids. And then the tip of the pyramid, in a lighter color here, lighter brown, is the renal papilla. The fat-filled space that lies between the urinary structures and the capsule of the kidney itself is called the renal sinus. This is normally filled in with fat. On this model, they have left the fat out, but to make it a little easier to view the other structures. But normally there's a little bit of fat here and here where the blood vessels are coming in, and there would be fat a little bit in this area, a little bit of fat in this area, in these areas here. And that fat inhabits the space called the renal sinus. Then where the blood vessels and the ureter enter and exit the kidney, this convex portion of the kidney, this concave portion of the kidney is called the renal hilus or renal hilum. On the urinary side, we have the minor calyx. The plural of calyx is calyces. So these are the minor calyces. These drain into the major calyx. There's one here and another one roughly about here. The major calyces drain into the renal pelvis, and the renal pelvis then drains out the ureter. Next, let's look at the blood vessels. Renal artery branches into the segmental arteries. Segmental arteries branch into turn into the interlobar arteries. Interlobar arteries branch into the arcuate arteries that define the boundary between the medulla and the cortex. The arcuate arteries then branch into the cortical radiate arteries. Then the cortical radiate arteries branch into or give off branches that are called the afferent arterioles. Now we are a little zoomed out here. What I want to do next is basically lift this model up a little bit so that we can see some of these structures a little more easily. So if you'll bear with me for one moment, I'm going to remove the model and prop it up a little higher. So that it looks something like this. Let's just adjust the focus a little more. There we go. Okay, now we can see a little more of the arterial supply. So again, these are the cortical radiate arteries. They basically go from the arcuate up to the capsule. Here's one, another, and another. Again, the veins are satellite to the arteries, so this would be the cortical radiate artery, cortical radiate vein, and so on. From the cortical radiate arteries, there are small little branches that come off that are called the afferent arterioles. The afferent arterioles then turn into a little capillary tuft that's called the glomerulus, and the glomerulus is surrounded by part of the nephron called the glomerular capsule. So next, let's look at the nephron of the kidney. The nephron again has two parts. There's the renal corpuscle, which are shown here by these small white balls. And then there's the renal tubule, which are shown here by these small little tubes in white. The renal corpuscle has two parts, the glomerulus, which are shown here in white, these small round circles, and then inside or enveloped within the glomerulus itself would be enveloped by the glomerular capsule. So these white balls here are the glomerular capsules, or also known as the Bowman's capsules, and they envelop the glomerulus, which would be inside. The glomerulus, again, is a small capillary bed. So the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule make up the renal corpuscle. Then they show you the extent of the renal tubule coming from one of the capsules, one over here and one over here. So let's follow the parts. From the renal corpuscle, we have the renal tubule, and the renal tubule has a few different parts to it. The first part shown here is the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, there's not much to it in this model because we are very zoomed out, but we'll show you it in a little more detail in another model which just looks at one renal lobe. So this is the proximal convoluted tubule. Then there's the nephron loop, which goes down into the medulla, makes a hairpin turn, and comes back up. The part that goes down is called the descending limb, and the part that goes back up, that carries the filtrate back up, is called the ascending limb. Together, this makes up the nephron loop, sometimes called the loop of Henle. From the ascending limb, that turns into the distal convoluted tubule. That continues as the connecting duct, and then that continues on as the connecting tubule, and then that continues on as the collecting duct, which is shown here. The collecting duct then ends at the papillary duct once it reaches the renal papilla of the medulla. Along the way, it collects urine from, or it collects filtrate from other collecting ducts shown here. Or from other connecting tubules, sorry, shown here. I get connecting tubules and collecting ducts mixed up all the time, I apologize. On this side, same thing. Here again is a renal corpuscle consisting of the glomerulus, which is not shown in this model. It would be a small little tuft of capillaries enveloped by this whitish structure, which is the Bowman's capsule or glomerular capsule. Proximal convoluted tubule, nephron loop, distal convoluted tubule, connecting tubule, collecting duct, papillary duct. There are just two other small features I want to point out on this model that they've included. After the afferent arteriole turns into and gets enveloped by the glomerular capsule, and after the afferent arteriole turns into the glomerulus, it continues out of the capsule as the efferent arteriole, and the efferent arteriole really has sort of two options in terms of where it can go. The first option is that the efferent arteriole can basically surround a lot of these tubules up here in the cortex. They don't show the efferent arteriole doing that in this model, but the name of that capillary bed that it forms are called peritubular capillaries. So one route that the efferent arteriole can go is to basically form a capillary bed up here surrounding these tubules, and those capillaries are called peritubular capillaries, not shown on this model. What is shown on this model is the other route that the efferent arteriole can take, which is that it goes down, instead of forming a capillary bed right away, it goes down into the medulla as these long, straight blood vessels. And these long, straight blood vessels are called the vasa recta. Vasa means vessel and recta means straight. You may recall the term recta or rectus from your days of A&P1, where we looked at, for example, the rectus femoris in your knee, or sorry, in your femur, and also surrounding one of the muscles that makes up your quadriceps, and then also the rectus muscles that make up the extraocular muscles of your eye. In any case, these blood vessels are called the vasa recta, and one thing to note that your professor will talk more about in lecture is that these blood vessels not only, or this capillary bed not only serves to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the surrounding tissue in the medulla, but the vasa recta also play a role in forming concentrated urine, as we'll talk about as you'll hear more about in lecture. The other features shown here are just some more nephron loops, or loops of Henle, as you can see them sort of running parallel to or surrounded by the vasa recta, both the arterial side and the venous side. Okay, that's it for the anatomy of the large kidney model. Thank you for joining me, and next we'll move on to the third of the 4 lectures.